I'm making my own way. But I stumble and I falter every day. But I love my baby now. When I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Stay with me.
Hello, and welcome to our continuing series, Pathways to Parenting Success. I'm your host, Dr. Jan Hittleman, Director of Boulder Psychological Services. We have a great panel for you this evening. Our topic are secrets to effective parenting. And I want to thank our partners, the Boulder Valley School District and the Boulder Valley Media Alliance and Channel 22 for making this free presentation possible. Remember, this is a live event and you can submit your questions either live in our studio audience or online by going to our website, www.boulderpsychologicalservices.com, and just click on the Submit Questions icon, and we'll receive your questions here. Tonight, we have three panelists. Susan Dennison was supposed to join us tonight, but she is sick and sends her apologies. And so I'll be filling in a little bit for her and just offer some final thoughts after our panelists have had a chance to share their information with you. And we have some great panelists for you this evening. Karen Wilding will talk about positive parenting, focusing on strengthening the parent-child relationship and how to minimize battles with your child. And then Jeff Kuhn will talk about developmental stages as relates to different parenting approaches as your kids get older. Elizabeth Matthews will talk about the drama triangle, and then I'll offer some final thoughts at the end. Then we'll be looking for your questions for our panelists. I also want to thank our sponsors that make this event possible: the Boulder County Healthy Youth Alliance, Boulder Public Library Foundation, the Boulder Valley School District, Centennial Peaks Hospital, the Parent Engagement Network, the Camera, the Hope Coalition, and the Latino Advisory Board of Lafayette. Our first presenter is Karen Wilding. Karen is a licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years' experience in the field. Director of counseling at an alternative high school for 16 years, she still enjoys working with adolescents and families. She has a private practice working with individuals, couples, adults, and families. Karen also works with several community nonprofits. It's my pleasure to introduce Karen Wilding.
Thank you, Jan. Good evening.
Microphone.
Oh, good one.
There you go.
Thank you, Jan. Good evening. Thanks to everyone listening. The topic we're discussing tonight is the secrets of effective parenting. Luckily for me, and also for you, the secrets are what I would call open secrets. They're things that we know in our inner selves, and we just have to remember that we can actually use our own resources to be effective parents. So I would just like to remind us of the top 5 open secrets. So the first one is to take care of yourself. This seems obvious, but it's often skipped. We need to take care of our own social, emotional, and personal needs in order to take care of others, especially our children. This is the first place that we're modeling that valuing ourselves allows us to have the energy to value others. Try exercise or yoga or meditation to help develop the inner relaxation you need to keep up with your children. You can always leave the laundry and instead read a book or get a haircut or go for a run. And tell your child what you're doing. I love reading, so I'm going to read a chapter before bed. Do you want to read or look at a book next to me? My son and daughter and I still read together, and we all find this personally rejuvenating. The second open secret is stay connected to your child. A child needs a deep connection to the important people in his life. There are many parts to this secret of staying connected, exercising what Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard. This connection is built on the foundation of spending time together. In our busy lives, it's easy to forget that 10 minutes of your undivided attention is an investment with 10 times the payoff. Your words and actions both are important in communicating your love and connection. If you live apart from your child for some part of the week, you can stay connected through a repeated text message or a welcome home note when they get back to your house. Simply saying, "I've been thinking about you and wondered how your day was," can mean a lot to a child or a young adult. The third open secret is communicate with respect. This means both speaking with respect and listening with respect. These are the really hard instructions. First, speaking with clear messages. This means saying what you mean to say, not a veiled or indirect statement where a child or teen has to guess at the meaning. Try using I statements. I need you to be home by 10 so I can not worry and go to bed. Or when you're upset or mad, you can say, "I'm too upset to talk about this right now and I don't want to yell, so let's take an hour and calm down." This is the secret to minimizing the battles that Jan was talking about. It's also good communication to be clear about rules and expectations with young children as well as teenagers. For instance, you can say, "It is not okay to hit your sister even when you're mad." Or, "We agreed you'd clean your room before you go out, so you can go when that chore is done." One of the best tips I can offer is to have many conversations when there is not a problem. Ask your kids or teens how they would like to be woken up or reminded to do chores so that you have a bridge of communication when tempers are stretched. Now, how do you build this bridge? An easy way to build the bridge is to talk to them about what they're interested in, sports or fashion or cars or whatever. A good rule is to have conversations with them when you're not trying to make a point or teach them something. And finally, don't talk too much. It has much more impact. So the second part of good communication is listening with respect. Listening to your children may be the biggest gift that you can offer. Listen to what they're actually saying. That is, try to understand the feelings and the importance to them of what they're saying to you, rather than thinking up arguments or responses to make your point. You can say things like, "It sounds like you're scared or overwhelmed or worried about the next step," and then wait and see what they say. You can then ask if they want your opinion about what to do. This kind of active listening empowers your children to learn to think for themselves and access their feeling selves in the process. So don't be too quick to jump in with opinions and solutions, as tempting as that may be. You can always ask clarifying questions, like, "What did the teacher say that got you so upset? And what happened after that?" When you're listening, stop what you're doing and look at your child or teen. Be sure you're giving your full attention to the conversation. This avoids the phenomena that in our family we call drive-by communication, where you aren't fully engaged in the process, so you can easily miss the moment or request to connect. The fourth open secret is give positive feedback. This is basic learning theory. You reinforce what you want to encourage. So don't dwell on mistakes, failures, misbehaviors, or something they forgot to do. Instead, talk about their capabilities and successes and how their strengths will see them through difficulties. Positive feedback is in the details, not just good job, but rather, that vase you made is beautiful. I love the colors that you used and the thought that you put into it. Thank you for helping clean up the kitchen. It makes such a big difference when you put the silverware away. There's also a way to give constructive feedback about what needs to improve. You got most of these spelling words right. Let's just look at these last two. Or, can you try and find a toy that your brother would like to play with before you take that other one away from him? The feedback must always be specifically related to the behavior, what's going on, not a comment about the child. We know this and forget it often. So in building trust with children or teens, there are three factors: intention, ability to do the job, and track record. The idea is to communicate that you believe in their good intentions. For example, getting the car home by 9 o'clock, or get your homework done, and that they have the ability to do this. They have a driver's license, they know what the homework is, but their track record needs work. And that's something you can work on together. You can say, let's improve that track record so that I can trust the deal you're making. So the idea is that genuine feedback about what's happening builds positive trust. It's done by communicating the facts. You got home at 9:30 and you promised to be in at 9. Rather than the value judgment, you can never be trusted to be on time. So the fifth open secret is to remember the big picture. One of the most important tips that I can offer is to hold in your mind the expectation of your child's success. Kids can tell that if you feel they're capable and competent and you see them as interesting, unique individuals, they will be able to survive this stage and make it to the next. My favorite example of this is when my daughter was in college and worried about what she would do next. I said, "You'll do fine." This didn't quite seem to help. So I realized that this was a request for extra attention during this big transition for her. So I started calling more frequently, asking how she was doing, and pointing out how well she was handling the stresses of college, social work, social life, and looking for a job. I needed to visualize her success at the next stage until she caught up. I think this is sometimes the hardest challenge, holding the confidence in their basic goodness and competence and ability to grow, even when they have fears and doubts. So I hope these 5 secrets: take care of yourself, stay connected, communicate with respect, give positive feedback, and remember the big picture, remind you that being an effective parent is about paying attention to the relationship with your child and putting your energy in the areas where it will have the most impact. So thanks. Jeff?
Thank you, Karen. Keep in mind that we're here to answer your questions, whether you're in our live audience or watching at home. If you're here in our live audience, you have index cards and pens to write down some questions for our panel. If you're watching at home, All you need to do is to go online to www.boulderpsychologicalservices.com and click on the Submit Questions icon, and we'll receive your questions here for our live panel. Our next presenter is Jeff Kuhn. Jeff is a licensed clinical social worker with more than 15 years' experience working with children, adolescents, young adults, and families in a multitude of settings. Areas of expertise include adolescent and general mental health issues. He is trained as a cognitive behaviorist and often works with his dog. It's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Kuhn.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Karen. So, whatever made you a parent, whether it was giving birth, adopting, raising a grandchild, or being a foster or step-parent, in my opinion, being a parent is one of the most rewarding and difficult tasks you will ever undertake. As with most things, one of the most important things you can do to become a better parent is to learn about parenting. Thoughtful study will help you become the best parent you can be. Information and research is available through many sources and will provide you with many interesting concepts to consider. Tonight, I will be talking about steps of parenthood, parenting styles, and I will also cover a few parenting tips. Just as your child will go through stages of development, you as a parent will go through stages of parenthood. The stages are as follows. The first stage is what they call the image-making stage. Before the baby arrives, you form and then reform images of the parent you want to be. In this self-centered stage, you are thinking more about yourself than you are of your new child, and you begin to make judgments about the parent you want to be. You have images and dreams about the birth and what it will be like to be a family. Parents also think about their past, their own parents, and how they and their partner will parent. Fathers may worry about the mother dying during childbirth, and women may be fearful of dying before knowing their child. Parents who adopt also go through this image-making stage. Stage 2 is called the nurturing stage. It begins at birth and lasts till about 18 months. This is a time to form attachment with your child and identify yourself as a parent. This is the time you will find out what type of parent you really are. The trust that is built between the parent and the child is the basis for secure attachment, which is crucial for healthy development. Trust emerges as your child's basic needs for warmth, food, dryness, gentle touch, eye contact, and safety are met in a timely and sensitive manner. Your child's first trust and attachment to someone that he or she can depend on begins early in life and lays the foundation for all other relationships for the rest of their life. One challenge in this stage is for the parent to let go of their parenting fantasy and to adapt to the world of diapers, a baby who cries and needs attention when you are tired or hungry or want to sleep, and the new challenges of creating new schedules, figuring out how to get to work and when to work, figuring out who's going to do the chores and when the chores are going to get done, figuring out what free time you may or may not have, how you're going to connect with friends and family. Not only is the baby born in this stage, but the new parent is also born. You may begin to question yourself and worry about what is right for you and your child. You may feel doubt, uncertainty, jealousy, competitiveness with everyone else in the child's life, and some parents worry that others may not care for their child as well as they do, or that your child will love the caregivers more than they love you. The third stage is called the authority stage. It begins around 18 months and lasts till about age 5. It's also called the preschool years. In this stage, children are learning to talk, and you are figuring out how to be an in-charge parent, and you have the new task of deciding what kind of authority to be in guiding your child's behavior and development. You must decide what the rules are and when to enforce them. Many parents seek out information by going to parenting classes, by reading books or watching videos, and by talking to other parents hoping that they will be okay. You may have also to deal with separation for the first time from your child if your child begins attending daycare or preschool. You may wonder if you prepared your child well enough, and you may also wonder how others will judge you as a parent or what teachers will say about you and your child. Once you think this through, separation will become easier on you and your child. The fourth stage is called the interpretive stage. It begins around age 5 and lasts till adolescence. During this stage, you must explain yourself to your child. The questions grow as your child's language and understanding expands. You may have to respond to more whys and hows. During this stage, children can be very harsh judges. Your child might call you names as he or she struggles to understand relationships and become his or her own person. Although what they say may be hurtful, they don't understand the deeper meanings or realize that other people also have feelings. During this time, you must decide how to communicate and interact with your child and their friends. You need to revise your parenting definitions as your child enters a new developmental stage. Your child may become more materialistic, may experiment with clothing, appearance, and behavior, so you must rethink expectations about manners, chores, rules with friends and siblings, and schoolwork. Remember to pick the most important battles on which to use your energy. The fifth stage is called the interdependent stage, and this stage lasts through the teen years. During this time, you'll need to guide your child closely through some tough choices, and you may question your own choices and your own lifestyle. Your child also begins to separate from you. Many parents say it seems like our children must learn to hate us in order to leave us. Again, there is a theme of distancing and separation. A parent-almost adult relationship is formed. And the final stage is called the departure stage, and ages kind of vary on this because kids leave home at different times. But during the departure stage, again, there are images of loss, separation, and distancing. Parents imagine where their children will go, who they will be with, and who and what they will become. Parents reflect on their parenting and how they affected the people their children have become. Parents judge themselves. Parents also think about the end of their role as parents when their children leave their home. Parents must redefine themselves as a family, and partners can become reacquainted with one another. Some parents also think about their own mortality. Although these stages are not absolutely hard and fast, most parents experience each stage in some way during the rearing of a child. Each stage presents challenges, but moving from one stage to another represents growth as a parent. Parents with more than one child can be in more than one stage at a time. The descriptions that follow may allow parents and caregivers to think about their basic parenting style. These styles influence the way in which children develop. The permissive, indulgent parent respond by giving children too much and have low demands. They give little punishment, set no guidelines, have little structure, and avoid taking charge. This parent, often referred to as uninvolved, spends little time and effort with their child. The children of this parent may learn little self-control. They tend to be immature, may be aggressive at home, and may behave irresponsibly in the community. These children tend to have low self-esteem, delayed emotional development, and little ability to handle frustration. They may skip school, turn to drugs, or even break the law and search for attention. Disengaged parents are low in responding to a child's need and low in making demands. They may be rejecting, hostile, or neglectful. This behavior is not clearly abusive, but may be very close, and it has a severe effect on children. The disengaged parent raises the least competent child. The authoritarian parent is demanding, but not very responsive. They are strict, use punishment, and are generally don't allow choice or freedom of expression. These parents value obedience, tradition, and order, and often discourage independence and individuality. These parents dislike having their authority questioned. They may use physical punishment and resort to yelling and threatening. A child raised by an authoritarian parent, a child raised by an authoritarian parent may lack spontaneity, curiosity, and creativity, and often have limited independence and assertiveness. These children don't learn how to decide for themselves. They are not sure how to behave and depend on others for a sense of control. They may have low self-esteem and may be aggressive and defiant. The authoritative parent, although not perfect, has a better balance and discipline style. They set high standards and have high expectations for mature behavior. They firmly enforce rules and encourage independence and individuality. The authoritative parent makes high demands and is highly responsive to their child's needs. Children's individual rights are recognized and choices are given. There is better communication and listening and more give and take. Children of authoritative parents are generally more responsible, more independent, have higher self-esteem, are more confident, are better able to control their emotions, which usually makes them less aggressive. Some critical parenting practices that will help you become the best parent possible include some of the following tips. Tip 1, as Karen had said, is to take care of yourself. Learn first to care for your own needs, and then you can better focus on the needs of your child. In caring for yourself, learn the skills you need to handle stress, to manage your household, to ask for and accept help when needed, and to realize the strengths you possess. Tip 2, understand yourself and your children at various stages. Understanding children, their development, and their needs is important. Each child is different, not only in his or her ability, but also in the way he or she sees the world. If you understand children and their needs, there will be less conflict in helping your child grow up and feel safe, secure, happy, and healthy. The third tip, nurture your child and your relationships. To develop your nurturing skills, learn comfortable ways to express love, to build your child's hope and self-respect. Also learn to listen and hear your child's feelings and ideas. Teach kindness, provide for your child's nutrition, shelter, clothing, health, and safety needs. Celebrate life and help your child feel connected to his or her family and your cultural heritage. Tip 4, guide your child through each life stage. Children need guidance. They must be taught to engage in meaningful activities and use their time in a positive way. Their growth as individuals depends on making choices and then facing the consequences of these choices. Tip 5, motivate your child to do his or her best. To develop your skills to motivate your child, you will need to learn how to teach your child. Children need to learn about themselves, others, and the world they live in. To be a good teacher, you need to let your child be curious, to develop an imagination, and to search for knowledge. Work to celebrate positive learning settings and help your child think about new information and new learning experiences. Tip 6, advocate for your children's best interests. Effective parents locate healthy and helpful community resources and work to meet their child's and family's needs. They seek out programs and people to provide services, guidance, and support when needed. Also, at times, you will need to be the voice of your child. So remember, parenting will always be difficult, but the job is easier with training and experience, and there are many things you can do while taking care of your child and yourself, so enjoy the journey and try to have fun. Thanks, and back to you, Jan.
Thanks, John. Remember, we're ready for your questions if you're watching at home. All you need to do is go to our website, boulderpsychologicalservices.com, click on the Submit Questions icon, and your questions will be here for the panelists to answer. Our next panelist is Elizabeth Matthews. Elizabeth is a local licensed psychotherapist and member of Boulder Psychological Services. She has worked with adults, teens, and families in the Boulder area since 1996. Founder of Thumbs Up, Elizabeth's current work focuses on building relationship skills with groups, families, and individuals. It's my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Matthews.
Thank you, Jan. The Cartman Drama Triangle. I'm going to talk about the drama triangle today because I think it is helpful in identifying relationship traps that we get into and hopefully can get out of. The position we choose on the triangle and the amount of time we spend on the triangle is typically influenced by how we were treated as children. I will refer to these roles as starting gate positions, but as we will see, we each occupy some of the role some of the time. We believe the messages we receive about ourselves as children and continue to approach relationships accordingly, even when we're all grown up. The triangle has 3 roles: the persecutor, the rescuer, and the victim. The starting gate persecutor usually received mental and/or physical abuse of children and developed a shame-based anger that dominates their lives. They believe the abuse they suffered was justified. Starting gate persecutors need to see themselves as victims. They are critical of others and feel that it's justified to be critical of others. They see things in black and white and perceive things as something you can either win or lose. They identify with the behavior of childhood abusers and become dominating, never wanting to feel vulnerable again. Persecutors are not bad people. They feel inadequate at a very, very deep level. The part of our culture that we rely on to say no, to protect us, to set boundaries and to break connections when necessary. Persecutors find relief when they learn to compromise, give other people credit. In a family, it's typically a father's role, but certainly not always. Starting gate rescuer usually grow up in families where their basic dependency needs were not met. They believe their needs, therefore, are unimportant, and they learn to neglect themselves and focus on the needs of others. Often these people are either genders found in the health professions. Starting gate rescuers tend to never see themselves as victims. They take care of victims, and they have the answers. They are burdened by the need to be seen as good. They try to encourage people to be dependent on them as a way of avoiding abandonment, even when this is unconscious. In our culture, we rely on rescuers to nurture, to maintain connections with families and neighbors, to volunteer, and to take care for the truly needy. This is typically a mother's role in the family, but certainly not always. Persecutors and rescuer roles are valuable. The problem comes when they deny their feelings. Persecutors think they know what is right and deny their vulnerability. Rescuers think they know what is best and deny their needs. When we compromise ourselves in these ways and deny our basic needs, things turn sour. Not being honest about our needs leads to resentment and can lead persecutors and rescuers to the third role, which is the victim role. And as I mentioned, there's the persecutor and the rescuer, and the victim role is on the bottom. So persecutors and rescuers inevitably kind of fall down into a victim role. The starting gate victim usually grew up in a family where a rescuer did much of the work for them. If a parent does not ask children to take age-appropriate responsibility, the child believes they are incompetent and they struggle with self-care, believing that they're never really capable of taking care of themselves. Starting gate victims are afraid to take a position. They like to remain blameless. They're super sensitive and want to be treated with kid gloves. They're over-compliant or possibly over-rebellious. They tire of looking up to the persecutor and the rescuer, and eventually the starting gate victim will try to get even, and that's usually with the rescuer. The victim or the typical child's position also has needs. They have the need to learn self-sufficiency, the need to be independent, and the need for healthy role models, not saviors. Victims need to be willing to accept responsibility for their lives and not blame persecutors and rescuers for their pain. Positions on the drama triangle shift. An example may be the rescuer or persecutor becomes fed up because they feel unappreciated. Instead of acknowledging these feelings and talking about solutions, they assume the victim role and fault others for their pain. Then other members of the family move to the rescuer and persecutor roles. The drama triangle is dysfunctional, codependent, and painful. It relies on good versus bad, right versus wrong, black versus white. When in reality, life is complex. There's not many absolutes. It allows individuals to ignore the damage of their behavior instead of making amends and accepting consequences. It supports the belief that you can have it all, when in actuality, sometimes in life you have to compromise and make a sacrifice. The drama triangle promotes monologue instead of healthier dialogues. The triangle addresses short-term needs instead of longer-term consequences. It relies on manipulation rather than on negotiation. So, to get off the triangle, recognize where you enter the triangle and identify the role you assume. Be honest about your feelings. When we deny our feelings, they come to own us. They hijack our brains and direct our behavior. So, to get off the triangle, respect yourselves and others. Establish boundaries. Accept responsibility for yourself. Protect yourself, yes, and have empathy. Be honest. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Be fair in your assessment. Typically, in any given situation, we all have some positive and some negative contributions. If you care about the relationship you're in with someone, risk telling them the truth. Because when you try to stuff that, it usually comes back on you in a pretty dramatic way. Negotiate. Look for middle ground with the people who are in your lives. Tolerate complexity. And understandably, this is very hard to do when you're overwhelmed, which is usually when the drama triangle happens. People get overwhelmed, they get scared, they get fed up, they feel lost, and they kind of contract on themselves. Solve problems together. Compromise and contribute. Staying off the triangle requires mindfulness. It's an ongoing task. When you feel stymied, victimized, or lost, step back, review the situation. There are more than 3 roles that you can play in life. And when you step back, you open yourself up to the creativity and the power available to you to better communicate and have relationship with the people you love. Remember to act. Act from your own center, from your own values, from your own priority system, and not react to what you think other people are thinking or doing. Be flexible and seek creative solutions for yourself and for your loved ones. Thank you very much. Jan?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, now it's my chance to pretend to be a panelist as well as moderator. And I cannot fill Susan Dennison's shoes, but I do have some thoughts that I'd like to share. One of the things that we didn't talk about tonight is the role of attention and how attention ties into child behavior. And this is something that we all do as parents, and we don't waste any time with this. We actually start right from birth when we bring our lovely infant home to that beautiful nursery with that great baby monitor that we have hooked up. And when our baby is cooing and happy, we feel good, we go about our daily routine. When our baby is crying, we go in to find out what's wrong as caring parents. What we don't realize is that creates a behavioral sequence where we're actually reinforcing the crying by our attention. And it's not long before our beautiful infant is crying more, and in fact, we're very proud that we can decode the different kinds of cries that our child makes. The hungry cry, the tired cry, and without realizing it, we're actually training our children to cry in order to get our attention. We know that attention is very important to children. It's as important as food and water, believe it or not. And we know this because we've seen many studies in Eastern European countries of orphanages that had rows and rows of cribs and not a lot of caretakers to give those children the kind of attention that they need. And when kids don't have the kind of attention that they need during this critical developmental window of early childhood, they develop what's called reactive attachment disorder. And reactive attachment disorder is really a tough thing to fix once someone has it. And not only does it impact them emotionally in terms of their issues around social relationships, interacting with others, intimacy, etc., but it even affects them physiologically. Children with reactive attachment disorder develop slower physiologically, have lower weight gains, are lower in terms of growth charts. It has profound impact on children. And so it's something that we really want to be thoughtful about as parents. We want to focus on how we provide and how we teach our children to get our attention. Oftentimes, our kids do whatever we teach them. And if we teach them to get our attention negatively, that's exactly what they'll do because they need our attention. One of the most common requests that I get when I meet with parents, especially of young children, is they will come to my office and they will say to me, Dr. Hittleman, we've run out of punishments. Please give us some new ideas. It's as if our child is inoculated to the punishments we've been using. And it's a frightening moment for parents because this is what we really rely on. We rely on negative punishment to shape behavior. And we know from research that only using punishment to shape behavior is really not an effective approach. We've done research on almost every form of life, and consistently we find that when we just use negative punishment, any species, including humans, learn much slower and develop a lot of neurotic tendencies. If we use positive reinforcement, learning happens much more quickly, and it's a much more healthier process. And so instead of trying to create new punishments, what we really want to do, and this phrase doesn't even sound right to our ears, is we want to catch our child being good. Catch your child being bad flows, catch your child being good almost sounds grammatically incorrect because it's so foreign to the way that we think. And it's not really our fault in a sense, because this is a cultural issue, and it's actually a cross-cultural issue. There's very few cultures on earth that don't operate negatively in terms of parenting. And so this is something that we really want to shift. We want to create opportunities for our kids to get our positive attention. We want to try to catch them being good. When my daughter was very young, I used to take great enjoyment in doing the following. She would be playing with her friends, and I would go upstairs and I would walk into the room and I would say to them, "This is incredible. What is going on here?" And within a few seconds, they would actually start not only confessing, but actually telling on each other things that they were doing wrong. And I would continue and I'd say, "This is just unbelievable." And I really had their attention. And I said to them, "You guys are behaving so nicely. Let's go have a great snack." And all you had to do is look at their faces to see that learning was taking place and that they really were getting the reinforcing message that I appreciated their good behavior. Now, the fact of the matter is, they were going to have a snack anyway. And this is something else that we do as parents, which we really want to rethink. We waste our rewards. We take our kids out to dinner. We take them to the movies. We buy them lovely clothes. We do all of these wonderful things for our kids, but we never think of connecting it with behavior. And that's something that I would really suggest you start to rethink. For example, the next time your child does something that you want to see more of, say something to them like, 6 months ago, you said, "Excuse me," and we really appreciated that. Hopefully it's something more recent than that. "Let's go out to dinner." Now, maybe you were going to go out to dinner anyway. They don't have to know that. And just look at their face and you'll see what I'm talking about, the pride that they have. One of the things that we always want for our children as parents is we want them to have good self-esteem, right? That's a big end goal for us, for parents. But if we only use negative techniques, how is that going to make them feel about themselves? We want them to feel good about themselves. The other problem with using only punishment strategies is it only teaches your child what they've done wrong. It doesn't tell them what you want them to do. It doesn't tell them the correct behavior that you want them to engage in. By using positive feedback, this allows your child to get that information. And keep in mind, I'm not suggesting that every time they do anything right, you're giving them a reward, a toy, or a thing. What you want to give them is feedback, genuine feedback, and let them know, just like Karen mentioned earlier, let them know the specific behaviors that they did that you liked and that you want to see more of. This is teaching in the most appropriate and healthy way for children. We also want to use empowerment strategies. Empowerment strategies means that we want to give our child a voice in the discipline plan. This is usually very frightening to parents because they're afraid that they're going to lose control if they give their children a voice in the discipline plan. But the fact of the matter is, and this is sad, it's bittersweet, but you can try this as an experiment with your child. If you were to ask your child the next time they do something wrong, what they think the consequence should be, chances are they're going to actually, believe it or not, come up with something much more harsh than you will, because they're used to a punishment paradigm. And so empowering them is a really wise approach because it teaches them to take responsibility for their behavior. If you empower them and you say, look, this is a problem that we've had for a long time. Let's try to change it. Let's come up with some agreements as to what I should do when you do the right thing and when you do the wrong thing. Have that conversation together. Write down the information. Have everyone sign a little agreement. And then if the behavior comes up again, the negative behavior, instead of you getting angry, you can just calmly show them this agreement that you made, and it teaches them to be responsible for their behavior. Otherwise, as most kids will, they will project blame onto you. They'll just say, oh, you're mean. They won't really internalize the message. And by using an empowerment strategy, it allows you to teach your child to take responsibility for their behavior. The other thing that we do as parents, which we all do this, and it's just so crazy, but yet we do it, is oftentimes parents will say to me, I'm very frustrated. Every time I want my child to do anything, I have to ask them 10 times before they do it. The reason that you have to ask your child 10 times is because you ask them 10 times. It's as if your child is playing with their friends and you yell upstairs, it's time to clean up. Their friends start to clean up, and your child says, don't worry, she's going to say that at least 8 more times. We have like 20 minutes to play. And you really can't blame a child for that because that's what we've taught them. And so with my daughter when she was younger, I liked the rule of 3. I don't think it's fair to expect children to listen the first time, although it's great when they do, because that would really expect perfection, and no one's perfect. And I could live with 3. You need to decide what you can live with your children. And so I would say to my daughter, it's time to clean up your toys. Yes, Dad, I'll take care of that. A few minutes later, she'd be playing. I'd say, I'm reminding you, you really need to straighten up your toys. She might still be playing. And then the third time, I used a technique. This is one of the few things that I actually created and didn't rip off from somebody else. But I created a technique called the mystery consequence. The mystery consequence is all powerful because what I did the third time is I said to her, you need to clean up your toys now, and if you don't, there's going to be a consequence. And you have to be a good actor. It's like tumbleweeds in a Western. You say it, and then you're silent. Now, of course, your child's going to say to you, well, what is the consequence? You don't say what the consequence is. All you say is, there'll be a consequence. If you want to find out what it is, don't clean up your toys. And again, just stare at your child, tumbleweeds going across the street. My daughter, once or twice, was curious about what the mystery consequence was, and I came up with something. Now, I have to tell you, I never knew what it was myself. It was kind of a bluff, but if she said, I'm ready for the consequence, I would provide it. Because think about it. If you say to your child, well, if you don't clean up your toys, no TV tonight, they may say to you, well, there's no shows I like anyway that are on tonight. I don't think you're going to be too happy with that. The mystery consequence is a powerful strategy that I would suggest that you try to use with your children. Sometimes, and Karen talked about this as well, sometimes our kids really just need us to listen and not really to tell them what we think they should do. You probably have had this common experience that most parents have had. Your child comes home from school, they had some kind of conflict with a peer at school, they're very upset, they want to tell you about it, and as they're telling you the story, being the good parent, you try to offer them solutions, and you say, well, did you say this or that to the child? Did you talk to your teacher? Did you talk to the principal? And then you're surprised to find out that as you're trying to be more and more helpful, your child is now getting angrier and angrier at you. And you were kind of minding your own business, and they came home and all this happened. The reason for that is they really were just wanting you to listen. They were just wanting to be heard. So one of the masterful communication techniques for parents is to really work on being a really good listener. We can always give advice later, but what we first want to do is we really want to listen. We really want to empathize with our child. We really want to reflect back how they were feeling. And say things like, boy, I think if someone was mean to me like that, I'd feel angry too. And to try to normalize those feelings, to try to empathize with those feelings. We can always give advice later. The other thing to consider, if you have an older child, an adolescent child, is it's very important to shift from dependence to independence. And this is something that's very difficult for parents because we kind of get it down. We learn some techniques that work for us when our children are of elementary age, and then adolescence happens, and Jeff talked about this in terms of developmental stages. Adolescence happens, and it's a game changer for parenting. We have to let go of the parenting strategies that worked for us in the past and start to rethink our parenting approaches moving forward. And the strategy that I would suggest that you consider is the shift from dependence to independence and the shift from control to advice. Part of adolescence is really for your child to individuate. And this means that in a very short period of time, they're going to be independent adults. They're going to have to make their own decisions. They're not going to have you there to help them. And so what we have to do as parents is we have to join that effort and not fight it. We have to give them more control over their decision making and shift to being a good advisor. Now, clearly there's exceptions to this rule. If your child is 14 and says, I'm going to take the car tonight, I'm not suggesting that you say, well, that might be a bad idea, but If you think it's a good idea, go ahead. That would be a mistake. We want to be thoughtful, but wherever possible, I would suggest to you to give your child some ownership over their decision making. You can give them advice and then let them learn from their mistakes. They may have to visit the School of Hard Knocks, but the School of Hard Knocks is a good place to visit when you're younger. The older you are, the more complicated that is. And if they need to visit the School of Hard Knocks when they're younger, it's a fantastic opportunity to learn, because we have to remember, as parents, learning always requires trial and error. We have to make mistakes. No one learns everything the first time. We have to expect mistakes in order for learning to take place. And our kids will make mistakes too. And the important thing is not so much what the punishment will be, is the learning that will go on. When my daughter would misbehave, and it would get me angry, and anger is another great challenge for parents. This was the only other thing that I created that I want to share with you, and I call it mutual timeout. Everyone knows what timeout is, and I'm always amazed that everyone knows the rule for timeout. We have a very small live audience, but I'm going to ask our live audience if they know what the rule is for timeout. How long are kids supposed to be in timeout? 3 minutes, no matter how old they are? Any other guesses? We got good guesses. The rule, and I don't know who created this rule, the rule is 1 minute for every year. So I'm almost up to an hour, which is sad for me. But the rule is 1 minute for every year. Unfortunately, a lot of parents are very proud. They say, I use timeout, but then they forget their kids in their room. And that's really more like punishment, right? It's like an hour and a half later, oops, my kid's in this room. Mutual timeout is an interesting approach. And the way mutual timeout works is, and this is what I did with my daughter when I was feeling frustrated or angry with her behavior, because we know as parents, when our kids make us angry, we say and do things that 5 minutes later we realize were probably not a good idea, consequences that we can't really follow up on. And it's just problematic for us. So the way mutual timeout works is you say to your child, I'm very angry with what you just did. I'm going to go sit on my bed and think about what you did. I want you to do the same thing. And in a couple of minutes, when we calm down, we'll talk about it. Chances are your child will be okay with that. And so it's important for you to do it as well, because you are very angry and your thoughts are not around what you want your child to learn. Remember that the definition of discipline is not punishment. We usually think that. But the definition of discipline is to teach appropriate behavior. And so when you sit down in your bed and try to calm down, what you want to think about is, what do I want my child to learn? What do I want my child to learn? And that's a very different track than, I'm really angry and I'm upset. After you calm down, and it just takes a minute or two, you regroup with your child and you have a discussion about what had gone on. And what I used to do with my daughter is, if I felt like she really learned her lesson, the consequence was fairly minimal. If I felt like she wasn't learning her lesson, the consequence was more harsh. Because again, it's not about consequences, it's about learning. And that's what we want to focus on in terms of our children's behavior. With all that in mind, it's time now to get questions from our home and live audience for our panel. If you are watching at home, please get off that couch, go to your computer, and go to our website, boulderpsychologicalservices.com, and hit submit questions and submit a question for our panel so that we can answer it for you. I have a question from our live audience, and I'm going to read it to you now. We have an 8-year-old boy who calls himself stupid when he gets frustrated with homework. What's the best way to handle this? Again, it's an 8-year-old child who calls himself stupid when he gets frustrated with his homework. How can we best handle this? I look to my wise panel for possible answers. Jeff, make sure your microphone's on.
I'll try to field that one. Well, the first thing I would ask my 8-year-old child is where he learned that from. And then I would try to expand upon that and help them see that they weren't a failure or stupid by reminding them of other things they do well. That's my short and simple answer.
Other thoughts? Our other two panelists are stumped.
I guess another piece I would add is also help them find new words to label themselves that's much more positive. Yeah.
The other thing to consider, too, is what we talked about earlier in terms of trying to catch your child being good. In other words, the times where he does do his homework well, and I'm sure that happens. To just remember, and again, I know it sounds so simplistic, but it's so difficult to do because we naturally don't think about operating in a positive mode. We just go to a negative mode. All of us do this. But what I would suggest, too, is when he's doing his homework well, to just reinforce that and say, hey, nice job. You did a really good job there. Because keep in mind, and this is true in school too, unfortunately, that the feedback that our kids get is usually when they screw up. When they're doing okay in class, life goes on, but when they're not doing well, usually they get that negative feedback. So anything we can do to counterbalance that with the positive feedback and catch them being good and reinforce it in a genuine way, how proud we are of their focusing on their homework and the fact that they did it so well. That's a great way to go. The other thing to keep in mind is not everyone, unfortunately, is good at all things school-related. Some kids with learning disabilities have tremendous problems being successful with anything at school. And so another idea to consider is to find what your child's strengths are and make sure that they have opportunities to experience success. Many years ago, I worked with a young man who had profound learning disabilities, but he was gifted in the area of mechanical reasoning. This boy, who was about, I think he was 10 when I met him, could take apart and put together a lawnmower engine. He just understood it. I couldn't do that. Unfortunately for this boy, that wasn't part of elementary school. He didn't have an opportunity to showcase that. And so when I evaluated him, I was a school psychologist at the time, I really encouraged the parents to find something after school that involves mechanical reasoning so that he can feel success. Because I always think of success as the building blocks of self-esteem. And clearly, if your child is talking about feeling stupid, well, we really want to really shore up that self-esteem and help him to feel really good about himself. And creating opportunities for success is a great way to do that. Whatever he enjoys, whatever he's good at, that might be a great
Can I add one more thing to that?
Yes.
I think since we're talking academically in that setting, I would try to help him add to his vocabulary and really define what he's feeling, whether he's stuck or struggling or just doesn't understand it. That also will help him kind of move through that time. And then in the future, he'll be able to say, I'm not stupid, I'm just stuck, or I don't understand the homework, or this is hard. That's kind of the cognitive behavioral training that I've been through, helping kids kind of restructure their thoughts. And at all ages, we're capable of doing that.
I think it's possible that when someone says Thank you. It's possible when someone says I'm stupid that they're trying to kind of get you to do it for them. You know, they want you to kind of feel sorry for them and step in. And that's an opportunity to help empower them. When I talk to kids a lot of times in school, what I've identified is they feel overwhelmed. And what they need is help in breaking down what the tasks are, deciding what the priority is, and working on it that way. So if you can get them to step back, find out if there's a real problem, and then empower them to approach it in that way, I think you'll be doing them a real favor.
And just one last thought is that you can then reward the success of the whole interaction and spend time doing something other than the problem. So as Jan said, we're not reinforcing the problem, we're reinforcing the goodness of the kid himself and what he's good at, and so that he does this piece of work with you, and then you take some time and just do something with him. Let's get stuff together for dinner, let's do something. And it takes the focus off that difficult task and onto the kid for who he is.
You guys, if you want to just leave them on, it's fine.
Okay.
We have a question from our home viewing audience, a viewer from Broomfield, who writes, how do you recreate connections when they have been severely damaged and the child has become very distant? and he mentions that he's a parent of a teenage daughter. So again, the question is, how do you recreate connections when they have been severely damaged and the child has become very distant? This is specifically for his teenage daughter.
It's a tough one.
Well, I have some thoughts.
Please.
One is to figure out what that teenage daughter is interested in. It's the bridge I was talking about. Figure out what she cares about, not what's the problem or what you can do, but what is she actually focusing on? And then see if you can have a conversation about that. What is it you like about that kind of clothes or whatever? And start building a little bridge of connecting to what's really going on in her life. And I've also found there are a couple of tricks for teenage girls that I think are pretty powerful. One is that sometimes you can just write notes. Send her a card, write her a note, something that takes the drama of your relationship with them out of it, where you just go, thinking about you, have a great Halloween, whatever, and they get to know that you're thinking about them. That's a huge, huge thing, that kids know that you're carrying them in your mind when they're not there. Now I've forgotten the third one.
Well, it'll
I'll
come
come
back
back.
Okay. I think an approach might be, well, teenagers work very well when you work next to them. When you're driving somewhere in a car,
was it.
or you're, was it?
Yeah.
Or when you're, making cookies, or you're doing something
Psychically
side by
started.
side and you're not looking at them right in the face. It's a more comfortable situation. And I think that you want to really calmly let her know that you're concerned about what the distance is, that you've noticed what the distance is, and that you'd like to do something about it. Now, she may or may not know why she's distancing herself from you, but you can let her know that if there is a time she's willing to talk, that you are willing to listen, and then be willing to listen. Take a deep breath, try not to feel attacked, try and understand where she's coming from. And ask her about what it is the two of you can do that they're comfortable doing together. Sometimes kids don't like to go to the mall and be seen with their parent, so you can ask her what she'd like to do, if she'd like to spend time together. And listen.
One thing I'd like to add in terms of when I've worked with teenagers and when things have gone bad in the relationships I've had with them is one of the first things I think that's helped me reconnect is to meet them where they're at. And also own my part of the dysfunction. If I did something or said something that caused the fissure, I need to take responsibility for that and apologize. And what that does is it gets us back to at least zero, and it also role models. And then I do some of these other things like create a space or say, I get something's wrong. When you're ready, I'll be here. And I give them and empower them to take some control and some ownership of that part of the relationship. But I think what's really worked for me is just taking responsibility and apologizing. I don't know how many kids have said, oh my God, you're the first person who's ever said they were sorry for something that I did to them. And that's been a really powerful life lesson and professional lesson.
Another thing I think is important is to not tell them what they're doing. You don't want to say, you're distant, you're being disagreeable all the time, you're cold to me. I think what you want to do is take responsibility for where you're coming from. I love you, I'm confused, I'm worried about this, I want to feel connected to you again, and so tell me what I can do to help that happen. Where are we going to go from here? So don't tell someone what they're doing, tell them what you're feeling, because that's the only truth you know anyway.
I guess one more thing I think to remember is that's part of being a teenager as well, is they are going to push away a little bit and create some distance. So some of that is natural and even healthy.
And then the last point that I would make is sometimes, family counseling can be really helpful if all else fails. Try to find a really good counselor who can help you and your daughter try to rebuild your relationship as well. But we appreciate your question. I have another question now from our studio audience. And even though I'm going to guess we have 200 or 300 people in our studio audience, but we're still going to get to those questions from our TV viewers if you send them in, so please do so. Here's a question from our vast studio audience. How do you help kids when they fall into depression? How do you help kids when they fall into depression? I'll blab while you guys think about it.
Okay.
One of the things that I often notice and I always talk to kids about is trying to do better at expressing their feelings. I think for a lot of us, especially boys and men, for primarily cultural reasons, we're really trained not to talk about our feelings at all. It's a sign of weakness. Boys don't cry, etc., which is horrible. It does horrible damage to our boys, soon to be men, and dads in our culture. And girls and women often have this issue too, not as frequently as boys and men, but they often have this issue too. And so I always have a phrase that I use with kids that I work with, and they always remember it, and I say to them, it's always funny when I say it too in terms of how they look at me, especially when they're younger. I say to them, you have to use the F word more. And they're just shocked, but they remember it. They remember it, and the F word is feel, to really learn to express their feelings more. And so I wonder, in terms of this question, because usually what we see, and this is true of children and adults, when we don't express our feelings, one of two things tends to happen. Either we start to act those feelings out. One of the most common ways that we see this is with anger problems. I have to tell you, I've been a psychologist for over 20 years, and this is one of the only things that I've seen that is consistent across people, is that when they have severe anger management problems, without exception, believe it or not, in my experience, they are terrible at asserting themselves, believe it or not. They're terrible at expressing their feelings, and so what happens is their feelings build up like a pressure cooker, and sooner or later, they're going to blow. Steam has to be released. And it's usually over a very minor thing, and everyone around them is like, wow, it seems like this has happened a million times before. What? You're overreacting. Well, it's because it's the last straw. Many, many things have preceded it, and they just can't hold all those feelings in anymore. The other way that we see it dysfunctionally happen is they internalize those feelings. And depression is the most common way that we see that as well. That doesn't mean that that's the case here for our question, but it's something that we want to really be thinking about. If we see people with anger issues, if we see people with depression, we want to make sure that they're doing a really good job of dealing with their emotional life, expressing their feelings. And so this is something that we might want to just assess a little bit.
Can I add something?
Please.
I think what it kind of brings up for me is, as a parent, first separating sadness from depression. They're two very different things. Sadness is very short term, and there tends to be still hopefulness. When you're sad, you still do things. You still find happiness in life. You're still eating and going out. When you're truly depressed, hopelessness begins to set in, and that's where you probably need to seek some professional help. And as Jan was saying, I think it's important with depressed people or kids, you need skills, tools, and support. So I think as a parent, beginning to look at this in kind of two ways. Is my kid just sad? Is he dealing with a tough life situation, break up with a girlfriend, didn't make a team? Or is this really something bigger than that? And I think that would be just a different starting place.
I think one of the hardest things about being teenagers is that you're a rookie, and it's always hard to be a rookie. And teenagers seem to me often to feel incompetent and overwhelmed. They haven't been on the planet long enough to know that we often feel incompetent and overwhelmed, and we get through things and it gets better and it's okay. They don't know that. They also think that they're the only person in the world who feels this kind of incompetence. So I think talking to them about that, finding out if they can tell you what it is they're feeling, to encourage them to get involved in some things where they can start feeling more competent, to encourage them to get involved in things that they enjoy, that they're good at, so they can start feeling good about themselves. And usually what we're good at is fun for us to do, and that's a nice thing to have at any stage of life.
So I just want to add the idea from a parent's point of view of not panicking and being curious. Try to ask questions and discover what Jeff was talking about. Is this sadness? Is this just what are the details of it? How does it feel? What are you doing? You know, questions about what comes out of whatever the current moment is. Oh, you're really not gonna go to that party? Why aren't you gonna go? What's going on? Who's gonna be there? You know, you have to learn to be a very good questioner, that genuinely curious about what's going on. And then again, two more things. One is that there are always adults in the world that can relate to your child besides yourself. And bringing in other people who care about this child and are willing to extend themselves is really empowering and can be very helpful. Often they can hear it from someone else and not from you, because you're their parent. And so a friend or an aunt or a mentor, all good, professional, bringing in caring people to help is a really wonderful aid when you're worried that they're slipping away.
I think depression is a large word, and when you ask people in the mental health profession, we get a little nervous about that because it can be a dangerous thing, but it's so broad. And I think one of the things you want to pay attention to is this someone who occasionally is feeling frustration and sadness? Because that's normal. And you can let them know that that will pass and help them through that by listening and giving encouragement. If it appears to be a pattern, if they're losing weight, if they're sleeping too much, if you really see a change in how they look or how they act, then it might be time to seek a medical opinion. And again, it may be an okay thing, but if it's a pattern, it's worth taking a closer look into.
And keep in mind, for reasons that no one can explain, our beautiful state of Colorado leads the nation. We're the #1 state in the country for adolescent depression, believe it or not, which is always shocking. It's always shocking, but it's true. And nationally, we know that over 60% of adolescents who are depressed are getting no treatment at all. So it's very important for us to identify and treat when it's severe, as Elizabeth pointed out, in terms of clinical depression, because the fact of the matter is, in the vast majority of cases, depression is a very treatable disorder. So we really want to make sure that the resources are in place. If you're not sure, as a parent, you know, is this just a phase? Is it serious depression? I'm not a mental health professional. Consider doing what we all do with our kids when we see physical symptoms. If we see physical symptoms and we're not sure what they are, we take them to a medical doctor for a one-time visit to find out if this is a concern or not. The same thing holds true for mental health issues. If we're concerned, ask a friend, get a good referral for a licensed mental health professional that's experienced working with your age child, and have them go just for one visit for an assessment and get some feedback as to whether this is an area of concern or not. We have another question from our viewing audience at home, and here it is. We have 10 and 7-year-old girls who are having issues with sibling rivalry, with one being an instigator and the other tattling or retaliating. When do you get involved and how? So this question is really about sibling rivalry. While our panelists are thinking about it, I will just mention that, you know, we talked before about attention, and when you have more than one child, if you're like most parents, when they're playing nicely together, you not only don't say anything, but you like tiptoe past the room because you don't want to upset the moment. But when they're fighting, of course, it's like an electromagnet. You're there, you're refereeing, you're coaching, you're providing a lot of feedback, lecturing, etc. And so this is just one thing to think about, and you can manipulate attention around this by creating structured rewards for your, not just one child, but your girls. In other words, you can create a system where if your girls are interacting nicely together, there's ways that that gets reinforced. There's fun, exciting, maybe activities that the family does. When they've earned enough points, each day maybe they get a point for good behavior together. And this will not cure sibling rivalry. There is no cure for sibling rivalry, but this should reduce the frequency and intensity of those problems. And if you're interested in learning more about that, and also just in general in terms of behavioral strategies around shifting attention and structuring that to increase appropriate behavior, there's a book that I wrote several years ago on the Boulder Psychological Services website called Parenting Essentials. If you go to the boulderpsychologicalservices.com website, go to the library, and then just enter in the search box Parenting Essentials, it'll bring you to the book. It's free. You can download it at no charge, and it gives you detailed instructions on how to use these techniques. Other thoughts from our panelists regarding this question about a 10 and 7-year-old girls with sibling rivalry issues?
I don't know who the instigator is, but I'll just say one of the things I've noticed with kids is that, see, I'm the youngest, and the youngest kid in the family figures out early on that they can annoy the older one and get the older one to react, then you've won the game. Then they're up in their room and you're watching Disney movies with your parents and having popcorn. So I think that you really need to be aware that when there's an instigator and a tattler, the tattler is not always as innocent as they may appear. That, again, there's a negative and a positive. Usually in a relationship, everybody makes some kind of contribution. And so you want to pay close attention to that, because we get it in our mind that the instigator is the problem, and we see them as a problem, and we start focusing on them as a problem, and we have to stop back and open it up and maybe ask other people, ask aunts and uncles, ask other adults around, are you noticing any patterns here? Is there something that I'm missing? Because there may be. And I don't know if that applies so much to this, but I've actually had kids tell me, and I mean a bunch, that negative attention is better than no attention at all. So I'm going to go back with what Jan's saying about when they're doing good, let them know, because they get bored. And it's fun to get somebody in trouble. It's fun to get your parents to focus on you. It's fun to shake things up. And kids will do that when they're bored. So, yeah. I'll catch them being good.
Other thoughts?
I think you said it well.
All right. I have another question from our vast studio audience. Please, calm down out there. This relates to something that Jeff said earlier. He talked about tip number 4, a child must learn to engage in meaningful activities, and also talked about use of time in a positive way. And so the question is this: how do we as parents limit and or allow wisely a reasonable amount of computer games, including phones, iPad, etc., and television? Is any screen time meaningful, positive, or productive? And this is a very common challenge and question, especially because, you know, we're in a technological world now that is outpacing us. There is changes and things happening that are almost impossible for parents to keep up with. And it's a very common challenge at home in terms of how much screen time is too much, et cetera. And so I think it's a really good question.
I think one of the very first things to say about this is to acknowledge what Jan said, that the world is gotten very much more complex technologically. And you can watch a 3-year-old kid know how to turn on a computer. And you see kids texting. They can text so fast that you're like going, wow. And they've gotten 2 messages by the time you've figured out what's going on. So they've jumped ahead. And one of the things I want to say is that there's no one rule that fixes this. This is not something that you can go, okay, that's bad, or okay, an hour is all any kid should ever get. It's just not a one-size-fits-all solution. So technology is not in itself bad. You know, we do like having access to information and learning how to use it properly. So it's a question of assessing what your child is doing when they're doing these things. You know, are they caught in a war game for hours on end, or are they using curiosity? How much is it spent relating to friends, and is that at the expense of face-to-face relationships. So it's a complex question, and I just wanted to start with saying there's not a right answer. But you should be very aware of what your child is actually doing.
There's some thought that a computer being in a central place in the home is a good idea, because the idea that someone could walk by and see what they're on may influence what it is they're going to be searching. The internet can seem very intimidating, and I understand that the fear of cyberbullying is a larger fear than the very reality of cyberbullying. But I'm not saying it's not a problem. But what I am saying is, the internet's here to stay, and so as far as your kids using it, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if it's not working and they're getting in trouble some way, if they're overdoing something, that's what you have to address. And it may be as simple as, well, it depends on how large the problem is, but let's say an hour of screen time a day. And if they're not terribly into it, they get to buy more time through other things. They clean up their room, they do their homework, they do other tasks and being part of the family, which is responsible, and as a result, that's a reward. The same thing as Jan was pointing out about going out to dinner. Let it be a reward for good behavior.
I mean, a couple things I'd like to add. I think part of this is a personal decision that each family has to decide what makes sense for them. But if we're talking about empowerment, one of the things I think is important is that you help kids get their work done. And then kind of, as Elizabeth was alluding to, they can accrue, free time, and how they want to use their free time could just be that. If they want to watch TV for the hour, shoot hoops. But I think the computer and technology should be in a central place. So I think that's a discussion each family has to decide. And the gaming and whatnot comes at the end of their workday. And I think and some of these decisions just need to be logical. If your kid's doing 6 hours of computer time a day, that probably doesn't make sense. So I think what makes sense to you and to your child, and I just saw some controversial research a couple weeks ago about how gaming may be more beneficial than originally thought. I was originally very against gaming and all this computer stuff, but this is something that I've read recently, that kids who enter into the gaming world can get a new sense of self, could enter into heroic activities, can learn to work with other people. And if you could somehow transfer that into the real world, then it actually becomes a really beneficial piece of technology. So it's here to stay. Each family has to decide, how and what it's going to be used. Computers and technology needs to be in a very central place. And there needs just to be some, logical decisions made on when it's used and how. And I think balance is the key. Too much of anything is unhealthy. And each kid's a little different. If your kid's gaming or on the computer and gets off and is angry, well, then it may not be a good tool. I talk to kids a lot when they're doing anger management and they want to use the computer as a tool. Well, did you destroy the computer at the end of the day? And I have had a kid who did do that, and clearly it wasn't a good tool for him. So I also think how they respond and how that really impacts them is also a piece of the puzzle.
I would just add, in terms of screen time, I actually met with a 7-year-old boy today before coming here, and one of the things that he talked to me about, which was really disturbing and kind of confusing, is his parents, on the weekends, encourage him to do fun things with them, like go skiing and go out and go to movies, and he gets very upset about that because he just wants to watch TV and play computer games. And that's a concern, right? And so one of the things to me, and I agree with the panelists, there's no hard and fast rules, but one of the things that you just want to be aware of is socialization. I also met a boy a while ago who was a high school student, and he spent every free moment he had playing video games online. And nowadays when you play video games online, you're playing with people from around the world. I mean, it's an interesting situation. And I asked him about friends, did he have friends? He said, I have a lot of friends. They were all friends online. His girlfriend, quote unquote, was someone he met online, never met in person.
He's 7?
No, this is someone else. No, this is someone else that I work with. And so he's a great example of sort of the other extreme, right? And that's really not healthy. It's problematic. And so we really want to make sure that our kids are when I assess for this, when I'm looking at a child or an adolescent and trying to assess around screen time? Is it too much? I look at their, daily functioning. Are they fulfilling their responsibilities at home? Are they fulfilling their responsibilities in school? Do they have a healthy social life? Is it affecting sleep? And frankly, if all of those things are okay, I'm less concerned. But if one or more of them are not okay, it's more of a concern. So for me, that's kind of the way that I would approach it.
And I think that if you want to spend time with your child and they're reluctant, it's possible that you're focusing what you're doing more on yourself than your kid. I mean, do they like to ski at a certain place rather than another? Would they rather snowboard than ski? Are there certain places that they like to eat that you don't go to because you have your own favorite restaurant? So part of being part of a family is making sure that everybody gets their needs met. And adults don't always do that.
Great point.
We have time for one more question, and here it is. What are the most important issues when parenting through a divorce? This is something that affects a lot of our families, a lot of our children. I think it's a really good question. It's a tough situation, but a really good question. Should I stall so you guys can think?
No, I haven't.
I have some.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, that question has very different answers according to how old the children are. And as Jeff was talking about, there's developmental stages of parenting and of the kids' development themselves, and of how you talk to them about divorce at each one of these stages. So that, again, there's no one right answer to how you go about it. And I'm mostly used to teenagers, so I'll let you start.
Well, my understanding is divorce itself is not necessarily as difficult on children as we once thought it was. It's how the parents treat each other during the divorce. And if the parents can not speak poorly about each other, direct their child to respect themselves and their other parent, and try to stay working with the other parent as a cohesive unit and making sure that the kid doesn't play you against each other. Because we'll all try to do that. We'll all try to go, Mom, I'd like to do this, and then Mom says no, and so Dad, I'd like to do this. And there might be a little competition there, and that would be completely normal. So you can't let your kid split you and start playing favorites, because no one's going to win in that game.
I mean, one thing it makes me think of is, as a parent, I think most parents spend a lot of time contemplating and then preparing for divorce, and then they tell their children, and they don't give children time to do the exact same thing. As the parent, you may have been doing this for a year or two before you actually get divorced. Then you wonder why your kid's upset for a couple weeks. So give them time to adapt and adjust. And I think, communication is key, and consistency. If your kid gets rewarded at home A, he should get rewarded at home B for the same thing. Or if you're in trouble at home B and you got to go back to home A, then the consequence should follow the kid back home. So I think consistency and communication are a really big part of it, for just giving a quick short answer.
Other thoughts?
Don't get divorced. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Well, and I think Elizabeth has a really good point, and that it is true. It's really what the research tells us, that it's not divorce itself, it's how the parents, it's really how the parents get along post-divorce. And I know that's tough, because people divorce for a reason. But the more that you can put the past behind you and have a good working relationship with your ex-spouse, basically the healthier your kids are going to be emotionally as a result.
And don't tell them age-inappropriate things. Sometimes parents will do that. They'll rat out the other parent about things that no child has a right knowing.
I want to let you know about a couple of the upcoming events that we'll be providing to the community. Our next panel will be on Channel 22 on Monday, April 4th from 7 to 8:30. And that will be on protecting your child from risky behaviors. We have a great panel for you for that evening. So make sure that you tune in on Monday, April 4th from 7 to 8:30 for our next panel discussion. And later this month, on Monday, March 14th at 7 p.m., we have a really special night in store for you. There's a free workshop at the Meadows Branch Library, which is in Boulder at Baseline Road and Foothills Parkway. And we're going to be providing a wonderful workshop called Strengthening Reading Confidence and Skills. And this is an opportunity to bring your elementary age child a fun book and learn effective strategies for reading. We have a fantastic facilitator, Miss Iris Lee, who will be providing that workshop. World-renowned Iris Lee from Dreamcatcher Instructional Centers. And I just want to thank our great panel tonight for their time, our vast live audience. Stay calm out there, just calm down. And our audience at home, as well as our partners, the Boulder Valley School District, the Boulder Valley Media Alliance, and Channel 22. You can find out more about all the BPS community events, as well as viewing previous programs by visiting boulderpsychologicalservices.com. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.
1, 2, 3, 4. Hey, I'm making my own way, but I stumble and I falter every day. But I love my baby now. When I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Stay with me. We'll beat this, can't you see? And wait a while, winter time.